We're going to move on to COVID, and we're going to start with you, Mr. Pinion.
Sure.
Here in New York, 7 upstate counties are on the CDC's high community spread COVID list, and COVID cases continue to rise as we head to winter in several regions of the state. Under what circumstances would you reinstitute mask mandates and other measures?
Let's be very clear. There is no silver bullet. There is no unilateral case. But from my perspective, we are no longer in a pandemic. We are in an endemic phase of what we're dealing with in COVID. There should not be mask mandates at this juncture. That is just the reality. The mask mandates were put in place at a time when we were trying to cross the curve, when we knew for a fact that we did not have the natural immunity, the herd immunity, or the vaccine that was necessary. Fast forward to today, over 50% of the people that call this nation home have been vaccinated or have been exposed to the virus. Many, many more have been boosted. So I think at this juncture, trying to, again, retrofit a 2023 America with 2020 ideas on how we fight this virus is probably a really bad way to go about dealing with something that we have so much more knowledge about today than we did back then.
All right, follow-up question for you, Mr. Pinion. Should COVID vaccines be part of the regularly scheduled mandatory vaccines for children? Why or why not?
Absolutely not. The fact of the matter is that when we actually had the vaccine put out, when we actually had the mask put forth, we knew that we were trying to mask the children, whether we agreed with it or not, for the protection of the teachers who were the most vulnerable. Those teachers have now all been vaccinated. In fact, many of them were fired if they chose not to be vaccinated. So the notion that, again, the medical community has done us all a great disservice here by not actually being straightforward about what is the science, what is the actual scientific method that we are following. I do not believe that the children should be vaccinated. Parents deserve the right to make that decision based on what they think is right for their family and their children.
For Mr. Schumer, same questions. Under what circumstances would you reinstitute mask mandates?
I would leave it up to the medical experts. That's what always has been my position. They know best of anybody. And the medical experts have really been much more accurate about what we should do than others. Let's go back to 2020. Donald Trump ignored COVID altogether, ignored the medical experts. He said it was going to go away in 2 weeks. I was early on this case because I listened to the medical experts. And in fact, in January of 2020, before COVID hit, when it was raging in China, I called on the president to create a national emergency. He did only 2 months later, and COVID was already raging. So the failure by politicians to listen to medical experts will always result in trouble. I would defer to the medical experts on these issues.
So same follow-up for you, Mr. Schumer. Should COVID vaccines be part of the regularly scheduled mandatory vaccines for children?
Well, we've always had mandatory vaccines for mumps, for measles, for whooping cough, and all of that. We've gotten them. Again, this is a new illness. They're just learning. It doesn't have the long track record or history of mumps or measles. So I'd leave it up to the medical experts, as I always have, on these issues.
Follow-up for Mr. Pinion. In an interview on Capitol Tonight with my colleague Nick Reisman in February, you indicated that China is to blame for the COVID virus and that the U.S. has yet to hold that nation accountable. Do you still blame China for the COVID virus? And if so, how would you want to see the U.S. hold that nation accountable?
Of course I believe that they should be held accountable. Let's be very clear. This is not my opinion. The Department of Homeland Security has said that China hid the extent of the virus, then hoarded the PPE supplies we needed to save the lives of American heroes while we were actually trying to figure out what in the world was going on. So yes, they should be held accountable for the deaths, for the actual pain and suffering of so many families, like my own family. We lost my grandmother, who died alone in a nursing home because of the mandates that were forced to be placed in society. Even vaccinated members of our family were unable to see her. So there is a great deal of harm that starts and has to start with the nation that quite literally hid pertinent information at that inflection point where we quite literally could have saved countless lives and countless pain. So yes, if you want to talk about holding them accountable, send them a check, a price tag first and foremost, and ask where the check is. If you're going to talk about financial sanctions, then we can talk about those financial sanctions. And perhaps that's the type of thing that we might want to include in a climate bill, because any climate bill that we're trying to pass that doesn't hold the foreign nations accountable is probably as worthless as the piece of paper that it is written on.
Thank you.